You see a goblin mother clutching her babies as she braces for the maul to fall on them, right? So you bring up questions about morality. You bring up questions about depth and about ethics. And do these goblin children deserve to die just because they're born to a species that generally raids and pillages and is just crazy and cruelly destructive? These are important questions, and I think that goblins are one example of a species that can be a tool to help us explore those themes. I've got a lot lined up for this episode. I've been really thinking about this topic and how I can bring tremendous value to the community on this one. This channel's goal is to empower game masters to run better games. If you are into D&D or TTRPGs, you have come to the right place. Hit that thumbs up button, guys, and drop me a comment. Let me know your take on goblins. This is all about goblins. The goal of this live stream is going to be to discuss everything a GM might need to know that'll help them run some goblins. And I'm going to start it off with a little bit of reading from Ye Old Monster Manual here. I'm going to read a little bit from the Monster Manual, but I'm not going to like just read a bunch. I'm going to read a little bit. We're going to discuss, and I'm going to give you my thoughts, okay? So first of all, goblins. Goblins are small, black-hearted, selfish humanoids that lair in caves, abandoned mines, despoiled dungeons, and other dismal settings. Individually weak, goblins gather in large, sometimes overwhelming numbers. They crave power and regularly abuse whatever authority they obtain. So this right here tells me goblins are evil, right? And in fact, if we look at the official canon D&D stat block, we will see goblins are neutral evil, both the goblin and the goblin boss, right? They are neutral evil. Now, this is an objective. This is an objective morality label by D&D official monster manual. It is what it is. I know that there are people who disagree with that. Personally, I believe goblins can be redeemed. I have had many goblins in my campaigns brought on as sidekicks by players who then brought them up and they became good creatures. Blue Rose Lion says, we have a player playing a goblin in my Friday campaign. Totally looking forward to his development. Heck yeah. I think part of that development is, so when they say goblins are neutral evil, I'm looking at this as a blend of nature and nurture, right? So we have nature of goblins, which is generally evil, and there probably is some genetic disposition to this, perhaps a little bit, right? Maybe goblins tend to be evil more than they're good, maybe in a little part by nature, but then a lot of it might also be nurture and culture, right? So if they're brought up in the traditional goblin sense, they're going to tend to follow the goblin tradition, which is to be evil, but that doesn't mean they have to be evil. And this comes around to one of the most, I think, magical arcs of any species, which is, must you be what your culture tells you you are, or what other cultures tell you you are, or can you become something different? Could you be good? This is like, a good drow. Can there be a good drow? Well, drow are usually evil, but of course there can be good drow. I mean, canonically, even in just the D&D universe, we see that, like, we have a Drizzt who was good, right? Very different from the typical drow experience. I believe the same thing can be true of goblins, okay? Now, I want to go on here. Goblinoids. Goblins belong to a family of creatures called goblinoids. Their larger cousins, hobgoblins and bugbears, like to bully goblins into submission. Goblins are lazy and undisciplined, making them poor servants, laborers, and guards. So this is interesting. So these are like traits that they tend to have. AWOL Warrior says, I have a goblin PC idea cooking in my brain. I just need to find the right campaign. Heck yeah. So in one of my campaigns, on my Monday morning 8 a.m. campaign, which, by the way, I run Games and Start Playing. If you'd like to join one of my games, you can find the Start Playing link in the description. But I have a player who basically they got attacked by goblin raiders, and then they ended up beating all the goblins. They killed all of them except for one of them. This goblin surrendered, was very afraid, pledged that he would do whatever they wanted if they let him live, and he became Gricko. His name is Gricko, and he is now their sidekick, and he has been very faithfully serving the group, basically being like a scout and a crossbow archer for them. And he's been working hard to prove that he is good enough to not be killed. And he's going to have the ultimate test pretty soon, because they're going to go attack the camp that he came from, where there's the goblin tribe, the Bone Gnashers are there. And there is a goblin shaman who's kidnapping children and using their blood to create elixirs to do different magical things. So the party plans to go in there and wipe all out and rescue and capture children. So Gricko is going to have to face his family, his clan, his tribe in a battle This is an arc that's currently developing. Also, the character who basically brought Gricko into servitude has set Gricko upon the path to become a paladin to the goddess he worships. So this is a very deep moral arc, very deep. But this character really cares about the arc of this goblin NPC and is actually also making him an official follower, an official sidekick. Or that's the plan. Is Gricko going to survive the test of fighting his tribe and family that he came from? This is a good question. Can Gricko actually change his alignment and become good? Well, which is what is basically being required of him by the party. We will see. Stewart says goblins are a blast. Playing a goblin would be very problematic. Everyone despises them, but would be a blast to jam that. Yes, you're right. That is another thing. Is people generally have a disdain for goblins because they're known as just little, loot-seeking, violent creatures, right? Which brings us to malicious glee. Motivated by greed and malice, goblins can't help but celebrate the few times they have the upper hand. They dance caper with sheer joy when victory is theirs. Once their revels have ended, goblins delight in the torment of other creatures and embrace all manner of wickedness. This is what the monster manual says. But once again, are they beyond redemption? I do not believe they are. I really do not believe they are. Now, I'm going to take a little break from that for a minute, and I'm going to talk about, I'm actually going to read a quote from my ebook, The Advanced Art of TTRPG Game Mastery. If you'd like to grab this, link's in the description. 24 years of gaming wisdom packed into a 50-page ebook describing how to run emotionally resonant games that your players will love. Now, I'm going to read a little excerpt from page 16 of this in the chapter, Why We Gather, the Emotional and Intellectual Purpose of Play. When we talk about the moral quandary of creatures who are generally considered born evil, but can they become good? I think goblins are a great place for this, okay? I'm going to read this. This is going to be just a little bit. There's like 2 paragraphs here. I'm going to read this. People sit down to play for many reasons, but one of the oldest is simple, escape. So we play our TTRPGs to escape, right? A few hours away from routine can feel like fresh air. Escape isn't working, or escape isn't wrong. It's just the first step. After a hard week at work or school, game night is a welcome breather. When the heart feels heavy, fantasy offers safe distance, and for a restless mind, the click of dice and the focus of puzzles, combat, and stats. This can serve to quiet the noise, right? Now, once that threshold is crossed, however, the discerning and master GM can invite players into a deeper state of immersion. And this is where it begins. And contrary to what you might think, it is not a matter of black and white. The game is either artistic, ephemeral art, or a beer and pretzels game, in other words. In fact, far from it, it is always a spectrum, and a discerning, masterful GM will always be looking for ways to slightly increase the creative, artistic expression of a game, taking it to greater points of transcendence, sometimes by a few degrees and sometimes by leagues. And this is where we come to the topic of goblins. And I literally use goblins as an example here. A quick goblin fight can raise questions about mercy. A tavern tale can awaken forgotten courage, and a campaign finale may linger in memory long after the minis are packed away, even if that campaign started out as an excuse just to drink beer and get away from normalcy for a few hours, right? So, a quick goblin fight can raise questions about mercy. When we sit down to roleplay, when we sit down to engage in this hobby, yeah, we do want to escape, but we're also wanting to create. We're wanting to create a story of these characters, right? And so AWOL Warrior says, beware the booyah. I don't know what that means. When we sit down to create these stories, right? Yes, it's a game, but it's not a game like Monopoly, where you just kind of roll dice and move your pieces and you make small choices. It's much more open-ended, much more creative than that, right? Goblins are interesting because goblins can be a tool and a mechanism through which we delve deeper into questions about moral things. Mercy. Were you born good or evil? Can an evil creature be redeemed? Can a creature born to a generally evil species choose to be good? These are concepts that I think are very valuable to explore. And I think goblins are an amazing species to put in your games for this type of exploration. And I think that if we don't at least explore this a little bit, make these things a little bit deeper, then we're missing out on a big opportunity. Stewart says, if anyone wants to watch a Goblin series where the main protagonist, Goblin, isn't evil, watch Monster. It is so cool. I've never seen that. I never even heard about that show. Mike is in the house. Welcome to the chat, Mike. Goblins, goblinoids are the main humanoid nemesis in my game world. I don't use orcs. Interesting. I use more orcs than goblins, but goblins always make an appearance in my games. AWOL Warrior says, Booyah is a goblin term for magic and those who use it, per Volo's guide. The comment was in reference to your shaman. Yes, okay, that makes sense. I have not read Volo's guide, so that makes sense to me. I've only read the core books. I've not read any of the new supplements. I in-depth read a lot of the 3rd edition supplements, but when 5th edition supplements started coming out, I was like, okay. Well, I've done my time. I'll probably read them at some point, but I've been busy with other things. But that is cool. See, that's a cool bit of lore. All right, now I'm going to continue reading some of this goblin lore from the Monster Manual. This is a 2014 Monster Manual, by the way. I still haven't upgraded to the 2024 version. Leaders and followers. Goblins are ruled by the strongest or smartest among them. A goblin boss might command a single lair, while a goblin king or queen, who is nothing more than a glorified goblin boss, rules hundreds of goblins, spread out amongst multiple lairs to ensure the tribe's survival. Goblin bosses are easily ousted, and many goblin tribes are taken over by hobgoblin warlords or bugbear chiefs. Seems to make sense. Seems to make sense. Let's talk about challenging lairs. Okay, this is also as per the Monster Manual. Goblins festoon their lairs with alarms designed to signal the arrival of intruders. Those lairs are also riddled with narrow tunnels and bolt holes that human-sized creatures can't navigate, but which goblins can crawl through with ease, allowing them to flee or circle around and surprise their enemies. So they're crafty little buggers, right? These goblins are crafty, so they're not stupid. The average goblin's intelligence is actually a 10, right? Which is like a +0. And then the same is true of a goblin boss. So they're not like above average intelligence, but they are crafty little buggers. Let's also talk about rat keepers and wolf riders, okay? Goblins have an affinity for rats and wolves, raising them to serve as companions and mounts respectively. Like rats, goblins shun sunlight and sleep underground during the day. Like wolves, they are pack hunters, made bolder by their numbers. When they hunt from the backs of wolves, goblins use hit and run tactics. I love having goblins ride wolves. Of course, in Lord of the Rings, the goblins rode, what were those things? Wargs, which are more powerful than a regular wolf. Stuart says, my campaign has a goblin queen that has organized all goblins in the realm. She's actually a lesser deity. Think Madeline Pryor from X-Men. Oh, that's really cool. That's super cool, actually. I like that. I like it. It's cool that the goblins are so organized. When you think of goblins, you kind of think that it becomes kind of difficult to organize them, and that's one of their downsides because they're kind of like squirrely. I think of goblins as constantly infighting, which in a way makes them stronger, but also it serves to disorganize them. This is how I think about it. I don't know if other people think about it this way. So the idea of one lesser deity uniting all the goblins and it actually being successful is a very powerful thing. Like, what if someone could command all of the goblins to attack a city-state or a kingdom? That would actually be pretty metal. And even though goblins by themselves are objectively kind of weak in comparison to other humanoid warrior types, as we've discussed, their sheer numbers and overwhelm tactics are kind of what they use. They're pack hunters, right? I'm not super crazy about the Monster Manual goblin artwork. I'm not super crazy. I don't know, man. I'm just not super crazy about it. It kind of looks, I don't know. I don't think it looks like a goblin. That's just me. Sometimes the Monster Manual artwork is hit or miss for me. Mike says, Stuart, very cool. I use a goblin king and queen who are viewed as minor deities as well. Stuart says, organized goblins with priestesses leading them, with berserkers and shamans all on wargs are crazy. Badass. I agree. Jester's in the house. Hello, Jester. Great to see you. I don't like the artwork for it either. I always make my own. I agree. Not to be too critical. I mean, it's better than I could draw. I'm completely artistically defunct with magic markers or pencils. In high school, all the girls used to say, don't give Josh any markers. He'll ruin anything he draws on. In high school, they said that. That wasn't even middle school. So it's like, that's what my life was like. All right. Now I'm going to take a moment from the reading from the Monster Manual to, again, I want to return to another thing. So one thing that I love to think about with goblins is I love to think about them the same way that I think about orcs, which is the same way that I think about drow. These are 3 species types that I keep coming back to the same theme with. And it's like, I think of them as creatures generally thought of as evil, but when we use them as tools to explore deeper moral truths or deeper ethical truths, right? Also, the fact that they're treated so badly, there can be such a stigma against these races in some D&D worlds. And then so there's like racism there, but we can explore that. How is that maybe sometimes with these species, how is that sometimes unfair uncalled for, cruel, and how do they suffer for it, right? I think exploring these things is really important. And that leads me to a concept of escapism versus engagement when we're running games. Now, we're going back to my ebook, The Advanced Art of TTRPG Game Mastery. This is my ebook, 24 Years of GM, Running Resonant Games that Players Love, packed into 50 pages, my top tactics, philosophies, and whatnot. You can find a link to that in the description if you want to grab it. But I want to read a little quote from page 17 of this book about escapism versus engagement. This fits right into this. And this is going to be just a minute. I'm going to read like 2 paragraphs. There's a story we often tell ourselves in the world of tabletop role-playing that we play to escape from stress, from routine, from life. And this is probably how it all starts. But escape is not the highest function of this craft. I believe this, and I talk a lot about this on this channel. In truth, it is often a mask, one that conceals a deeper hunger, not for distraction, but for engagement, and I would dare say creativity. The kind that demands something of us, the kind that reflects us, a shrouded version of us back at ourselves, the kind that carries the potential to leave us changed, okay? When we engage in TTRPGs and we are role-playing and we're telling stories, I really believe that we have the ability, not everyone maybe does this, but I think a lot of people do. We have the ability to put some of ourselves into the characters we're playing, into the characters we're running. And if we're a GM, some of ourselves into the goblins in our campaign, or the orcs, or the drow in our campaigns, right? Now, escapism by itself is passive. It is comfort without challenge. It is the refusal of weight, okay? This is why I have an issue using the term escapism with TTRPGs just as a baseline. I think it's more than that. And yes, it has its place. We all need rest. But when escapism becomes the only mode of play, something sacred is lost. The table becomes a theme park, not a crucible. Players consume content rather than create meaning, rather than creating their own stories. And the material of the narrative, instead of growing its own soul, simply falls to the wayside and endures the bare minimum. This is why I'm often critical of like the quote unquote beer and pretzels games, right? Because it's more about escapism, hanging out, just drinking beer than about creating a story. Now, I'm not trying to be critical of beer and pretzels gaming at all, but I am trying to say that I think it can and should probably, in most cases, be more than that, right? Now, engagement is what I'm talking about. Engagement is different. Engagement asks larger questions and seeks transformative answers and invites us to show up, not just with character sheets, but with our whole selves, and then ready to role play that. Stuart says, I use Night Cafe AI to create my goblins. I always make my own for my Beyond custom monsters, including goblins. I agree. I make my own too, except for sometimes I'll use the stock artwork just for fun. Like I used the stock Bullywug artwork in my recent 8 a.m. group campaign. That was fun. But a lot of times I'll create my own artwork using AI. When I say I create my own, I don't mean I draw it. I mean, I prompt AI to make artwork that I can use that's more original than the artwork in the books to my campaign. I want to use artwork in my campaign that will bring the players a different experience. All right. Now, I'm going to go ahead and finish this quote here. Engagement is different. Engagement asks larger questions and seeks transformative answers. It invites us to show up, not just with character sheets, but with our whole selves. It becomes an artistic process that doesn't just care about how clever the puzzle was or how many goblins were killed. I use goblins as an example here as well, right? So they're not just XP sponges. Instead, it becomes more about what we learned in the process, what we felt, what we revealed about ourselves, about the characters, and about what we are all seeking and pursuing as we create the story together, okay? So, for example, you're slaughtering goblins in a cave, your characters are, or the characters in your group, okay? But then maybe one of the goblins cries out for mercy and says they'll be good. Or you see a goblin mother clutching her babies as she braces for the maul to fall on them, right? So you bring up questions about morality. You bring up questions about depth and about ethics. And do these goblin children deserve to die just because they're born to a species that generally raids and pillages and is just crazy and cruelly destructive? These are important questions, and I think that goblins are one example of a species that can be a tool to help us explore those themes. Part of it is because of the nature of what they are. They are generally evil, destructive. They go out looking for death and carnage, and yet they're not that strong. So it is a perfect situation where they might roll up on an adventuring party trying to do carnage, but then the adventuring party proves more than a challenge and ends up with this question: how far do we take our vengeance, our justice, our power out on these lesser creatures? When I say lesser, I mean literally lesser hit points than us, who are easier for us to destroy than for them to destroy us. It creates a power dynamic, right? Blue Rose Lion says, "Oh, I definitely put a bit of myself into my characters. I'm currently playing a paladin, and my son just rolls his eyes at me. He thinks I'm a paladin anyway, as I'm praying over my food all the time." I actually also love to play paladin. Probably my religious background has something to do with that. I definitely put myself into my characters as well. And I think that this makes the game more special. I would encourage all players to do this. Mike says, "I Google for images that will work with what I envision. Too cheap for paid AI at this point." Very understandable. There's plenty of artwork on Google. Mike also says, "My complaint about goblins is that once the PCs are beyond level 3, we'll rarely, if ever, use them again." So that's kind of true, but I also kind of disagree in the sense that there are really creative ways to use goblins beyond level 3. For example, beyond level 3, players might not see goblins individually as a threat, but they might see a tribe of goblins as like a valuable tool to hire or to persuade or even to force into subservience, right? So like my games, a lot of times when my higher level characters encounter a tribe of goblins, I mean, they know they could go in there and wipe the floor with all the goblins, but they also know, what could we do to force these goblins to serve us? We could have a whole tribe of goblins serving us if we play our cards right, right? I've had that play out a lot of times. And that, again, raises kind of a different, that takes the role play to a deeper level, I really feel like. AWOL Warrior says, "Is AI artwork allowed in the art section of the Discord server? I had a couple of homebrewed monsters that I was proud of, but didn't want to cross any artists who really worked on their images." Yes, you can totally drop AI artwork in there. I would say the only ethical thing is just say, I created this with AI. Don't like say, "I drew this. Look at my amazing art skills." I think that is kind of what's considered unethical. But yeah, totally. You can drop this stuff in the Discord. By the way, if you haven't joined the GM Philosophy Discord, make sure to do it. We are nearly 600 GMs strong, all kinds of awesome stuff going on in there, continued conversations about running games, playing TTRPGs, designing TTRPGs. There are contests, all kinds of great stuff going on in there. You can post your games, looking for players. Make sure you join us. Links in the description. It's free, and we're just hanging out, having a good time. Be cool like the cool kids. All right. I'm going to read a bit more about goblins from the monster manual here. Worshippers of Muglibiet. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this correctly, but anyway, whatever. Muglibiet, the mighty one, the lord of depths and darkness, is the greater god of goblinoids. Envisioned by most goblins as an 11-foot-tall, battle-scarred goblin with black skin and fire erupting from his eyes, he is worshipped not out of adoration, but fear. Goblins believe that when they die in battle, their spirits join the ranks of Muglibiet's army on the plain of Acheron. This is a privilege that most goblins dread, fearing the mighty one's eternal tyranny even more than death. This is metal. I think that's cool. Stuart says, "Change them, Mike. My goblins level up in CR similar to my players. Again, their leader in my campaign is a lesser deity." Once again, we have this religion of the goblins here to play with, right? Now, in your homebrew world, it might be different, but I'm going to look this up. Muglibiet 5e. What's the lore about this deity? Okay. We're going to look at the Forgotten Realms wiki here, see what kind of information we have. Muglibiet appeared as a terrifying battle-scarred 9 to 11-foot tall goblinoid entity. He had ebony black skin, glowing red eyes from which red flames flicked, sputtered, and erupted, sharp fangs and muscular arms ending in vicious talons. So he literally had talons. Manifestations. We'll read a little bit about this lore here from forgottenrealms.fandom.com/wiki/Muglibiet. Omens from Muglibiet took the form of blood seeping from an axe's edge, unusual behavior from the wolves and wargs amid the mounts of the goblins, and direct communication via utterances from shamans and trances. Muglibiet's goblin acolytes also sought signs of his favor in other ways, constantly looking out for his approval in forms such as auspicious rolls of thunder or the nearby landing of a bird of prey. When hobgoblins encountered other goblinoids, whether on purpose or by accident, it was viewed as a divine sign by all that Muglibiet had called them together to do his bidding on a grand scale. When a gathered host began to fail and fall to infighting, bugbears took the disarray as a sign that Muglibiet was no longer looking and would soon turn on their hobgoblin leaders, taking a few of their heads as trophies before leaving. Interesting. Okay, so That's just some of the lore on the wiki, what the wiki page says. Mike says, Stuart, I have changed them. I don't use book lore for my goblins. That's cool, and I totally agree. You can use your own lore, make your own lore for the goblins. I think that this is awesome. Nothing wrong with that at all. So again, I'm going to read a small excerpt from my book, The Advanced Art of TTRPG Game Mastery. You can grab that. Links in the description if you'd like to grab it. 24 Years of Gaming Wisdom about how to run emotionally resonant sessions that keep players wanting more, packed into 50 pages. You can grab it in the description. But from page 16, I want to just read you, and again, a couple paragraphs here about this, and I think goblins fit into this. When we listen and take small risks together, meaning when we come together to game at the table, and when these risks actually begin to matter on an emotional level to the humans at the table, well, the game ceases to be just a game and instead becomes a canvas for shared intellectual art. I talk about this a lot. A story we quote for years, a mirror and compass revealing who we are and what we value, and a place where everyone gets to explore avenues and factors of life that may otherwise not be accessible to them. This brings up a really good question, and goblins help us to answer this. How often do you actually get the chance to encounter something as overtly evil as a band of goblins? And then if you actually encountered that, how would you treat it? This is so different from what we experience in life. However, it can help us to push moral questions to an extreme because goblins are so overtly goblins. There's no mistaking it. If you see a group of people hanging out on the side of, hanging out at the street corner down the street from your house near downtown in your city, you might think a number of things. You might look at them and you might draw conclusions. You might think, oh no, they're hoodlums. Or you might think, oh, maybe they're gathered there because they're studying philosophy, right? Or you might think, oh, what a cool group of people just socializing, hanging out. Or you might think, oh my God, is that a bunch of criminals? Are they like trying to stake out the neighborhood? Are they like trying to plan their next robbery? And you might draw conclusions about these people based on maybe what they're wearing, what they look like, how they're acting, how they're talking, right? What part of town you're in, what they seem to be doing. But all of this is so murky. But when you have goblins, if in a fantasy setting, if you walk down the street and you see a group of goblins gathering outside the city walls, there are much fewer conclusions you're probably going to draw. You're probably going to think, uh-oh, those are goblins. They are known for raiding and pillaging and causing carnage. We're probably going to get attacked. And probably 95% of the time, in drawing such a black and white conclusion, you're probably right, okay? So in some ways, fantasy tropes give us these really black and white moral situations that, we do deal with those situations in real life, but they're never so black and white, and they're never so overt, right? So with that being said, I want to continue what I'm about to read here, okay? From my ebook. This is truly how it starts, with a few meaningful encounters with just a hint of attachment. And from there we build. Through story, we rehearse big questions. What will I give? Whom do I trust? What does hope cost? What is the point of it all in the end, right? So we explore these deeper questions in the game through the story. Because play in a TTRPG can reach that level if we as game masters choose to steward it in that direction. We can choose scenes that carry feeling. We can treat every player as a crucial co-author, and we can gently nudge past comfort to send the table to a place of real emotion. For example, you see a group of goblins gathering outside the city, but then when you roll your perception check, one of your players makes a successful perception check and they see that they all look malnourished and like they're starving, the ribs showing through their bodies. They all have sores on themselves. They look malnourished and sick and like they're dying of hunger. And they look like, their eyes are drooping, but they're rallying themselves for one last attack. There's little goblin children in the ranks. They just look desperate. So there's that. Now it becomes, wait a minute. These goblins are like emaciated and dying of hunger. It looks like they're about to do their last strike. They're going to try to raid this village, and it looks like it's probably do or die for them. What do your characters do in that situation? Does that create a new moral question? See, I really believe goblins are a great tool for pushing these kinds of deeper questions. I think they're a fantastic tool for this. And I think that the reason that they are that way is because of the nature of what they are. They are a humanoid creature that is generally seen as evil and generally is evil. Their culture and society are generally evil. but they are not altogether just like unsavedly evil. They're not beyond redemption completely. We see this in the lore. We see this in our own games. I'm sure you've had good goblins in your games. So where do you draw that line? What are your characters going to do about it? These are great questions to push. Heavenly Buddha says, no, my campaign is homebrew, but I have started out with a goblinoid starting adventure. And one of my players is playing a goblin named Robin Hood with the charlatan background. So I want to know more. He's been dressed up as a gnome, hiding his ears in a red garden gnome-esque hat. Nice. Actually, that's pretty cool. He's given himself a little thieves guild that I plan to use in the next session while they're in a more festive tourney situation. I like that. That's super cool. So here's my thinking about this. When you talk about, he's a goblin, but he's dressed as a gnome, do the other party members know? Do they know he's a goblin, or are they at the moment under the assumption he's a gnome, or is that only for non-party members? Like, I'm wondering, that's actually important, because I would want to know how the other player characters are going to role play, finding out he's actually a goblin. Do they care? Do they not care? Obviously, we don't want in-game bullying because of some species, but a lot of times we have to take into account that racism would be at play. For example, in my Darkest Dawn campaign that I'm running for multiple groups right now, they're playing in Eastern Elisauria. And in Eastern Elisauria, there is a strong, fierce racism against half-elves, mostly born from the contemporary elves who are studying magic at the university in Elisauria. And so a whole culture has erupted from that group of elves, and they detest half-elves because they see them as the offspring of elves who settled for less in their mates and just like very irresponsibly spread their seed amongst the lesser, less powerful, less long living races. And so they see them as mongrels and dogs. And there's terrible racism in my game toward half elves. And so, I don't use that as an opportunity to bully players, but if we role play those things out and there are cultural, this raises unique challenges and role play opportunities for players and characters, right? So there's a fine line there. You don't want to be mean to your players, but at the same time, I always give a disclaimer. Like, before you play this, just know you're going to probably encounter some weird stuff in this world. You're playing in a part of the world where this kind of creature is not very well regarded, right? At least by the elves or whatever. The humans like the half elves. They don't care. They see them as one of their own. But anyway, Mike says, my goblins originated in the Feywild like the elves, and so they are long-lived, and they grow continuously as they age. Goblins grow into hobgoblins, which grow into bugbears. Oh, that's cool. I like that. That's cool lore. I really do like that. Mike says, that sounds reasonable. Nice, somewhat moral quandary with the goblins regarding the starving goblin setup. Yeah, I like those kinds of things. My mind always goes to these types of things, right? And I think it's cool. All right, now I'm going to continue. There's a little bit more goblin lore. There's actually not much more goblin lore in the monster manual. We've about covered it, but I want to cover kind of the stat block, okay? Goblins are a small goblinoid. They're called neutral evil in the stat block, okay? They have an armor class of 15 wearing leather armor, and they usually carry a shield. They have 7 hit points. They have a speed of 30 feet, and they have senses of dark vision, and they have a stealth skill. They speak common and goblin. They have the ability nimble escape. The goblin can take the disengage or hide action as a bonus action on each of its turns. And then they're typically armed with a scimitar and a short bow. It seems reasonable to me. The Heavenly Buddha says, not yet, as in the players don't know that the goblin is actually a goblin and not a gnome. I do have plans for if certain people figure out they have been treated with disdain by the people of the kingdom they're in, but mostly as incentive to do crime against them. He's a rogue. Okay, nice. I like it. I really like that. I think that's a cool thing. I think it's cool when players are creative enough that they create like a character with a secret identity. I think this is really cool. I have a character in one of my Monday games that is playing a chthonic tiefling that kind of looks like a corpse, but he disguised himself to look like a human leper. And part of that was to keep people away from him. He literally was like role playing as a leper to try to keep people at arm's distance because he had been previously a slave and had been treated terribly, and all these terrible things that happened to him. Then he got away by gaining power through like a sort of like warlock patron type being who gave him his blood to drink that slowly turned him. So he began life as a human, and then he slowly started turning into a tiefling by drinking this blood. That's also how he conceives like leveling up and gaining more powers, continues to drink from this vial of magical blood from this creature. But he also takes on darker tendencies from this evil creature as he does so. So he kind of began as a good creature, but he's kind of shifts toward evil. That kind of seems to be how the arc is going. It's very cool. He came up with all of that for his player characters. Super, super creative. I love it when player characters create these things, but there was that hidden identity element to it, right? And it's really, really cool. I do want to talk a little bit about like how we can make goblins different than just stock goblins. I really believe that so I think goblins a lot of times are used as a cookie cutter bad guy. It's just like, oh, I'll throw a swarm of goblins in there. But I love it when people do different things with them. For example, what Mike is saying. In Mike's world, he's talking about how his goblins are actually from the Feywild, and they are long-lived, like the elves. They grow continuously as they age, so they get bigger, and they grow into hobgoblins and then bugbears. And this is very creative. I really like this. So that's kind of like their lifespan. So this is something different. I think that it's really cool to put a different spin on them. I also think it's cool to put different spins on different tribes and what they do. I think that the tribalism and religion of goblins can be a really fun tool to play with. Like what are they doing? Like, obviously they want treasure. They want to eat. They want to mate to make offspring. They want to be safe and not die. They want to, destroy their enemies and dance on their graves, that kind of thing, right? So, but they want these things. But what else are they motivated by? They're probably led by some kind of shaman or chieftain. What do they want? Are they motivated only by power, or do they have some kind of religious quest, right? Are they thinking that, they're in a holy war, or are they thinking we're supposed to become the supreme race? Like, what is their motivation? If we can back engineer the motivation of the leader of the goblins, this can give the goblins themselves a lot more realism. It can give them more originality, uniqueness. So these are all ideas, right? And there are all kinds of things we can do. I mean, use your imagination to come up with different things, but it could also be true that the gods in your world would relate to goblins differently. So what if the goblins found a shrine to one of the gods in your world? What if you just random rolled it and they found a shrine and they started worshiping that god? How would that change the way they behave? How would that change the way that they do the things they do? You could literally random roll which god from your world they found the shrine of, and if it's a good god, maybe they have become a little more enlightened goblins. If it's Nerul, the god of murder, maybe they're out here literally sacrificing each other to get more special powers, and maybe it's working. Right? Heavenly Buddha says, I made the enemies interesting, a shaman goblin that wore 5 necklaces of the goblin gods, the main hobgoblin one, and held a white-tipped 3-headed flail who has been threatened by a Yuan-Ti with a black dragon as an ally. That's always cool. Goblins worshiping dragons is highly awesome, especially if the dragon's still lurking around, right? Stewart says, motivation is critical. My goblins are barbaric and merciless, but they became that way due to persecution. They want to survive and prosper, but everything hates them, so they became monsters. Yes, I agree with you. Motivation is critical. I'm going to look up something real quick here, and I think this is worth pursuing. The history of goblins, according to D&D 5e. Okay, we're going to look at this this is actually the Forgotten Realms wiki. We're going to go here. Goblins were a race of small, numerous goblinoids common throughout Toril, often living in underground caverns near the surface known as lairs. Okay, we know this. We want to go to their history, though. Goblins trace their origin to the ancient courts of the Feywild, where they first appeared with their hobgoblin and bugbear kin. On the surface, the 3 were as distinct as elves, dwarves, and halflings, and they were frequently considered separate species, albeit one with a common ancestor, yet all were capable of interbreeding. Even so, the specifics of their connections were unclear. One hobgoblin creation myth of unknown origin posited that Muglibiet created the goblins, and that after the wretched creatures fled from the surface, he answered their prayers to create a race that could end the reign of the surface dwellers by making the hobgoblins. At the same time, the brutal magical traditions of the hobgoblins might suggest that it was they who created their cousin species, both goblins and bugbears, to serve specific combat roles in their early civilizations. In any event, the goblins once had many powers they followed. Early goblins, for example, served in the court of the Queen of Air and Darkness, the sister of the fairy queen Titania. They thrived in her dangerous domain with the help of their supernatural talents for finding weak spots and larger foes and getting out of trouble, special boons from the queen herself. I've run goblin groups in my campaigns that were like, I one time had this goblin tribe that they lived in the mountains where there were a lot of giants. So they literally specialized in hunting giants. So they had these like tactics, like pack tactics, all designed around hunting giants. That was their whole culture, was fighting giants. It was like killing giants was the ultimate good a goblin could do. Like it was their whole thing. Because imagine that. Goblins living with giants would just punt them. I mean, they would be really rough existence, right? Anyway, so there's a little bit of history and mythology about the goblins. Heavenly Buddha says he was given religious freedom, but had to convince the goblinoid population of a neighboring kingdom, Green Garden, near Redwall, starting town my players are in, to attack Redall to prove their worth. Interesting. Oh, so he was given religious freedom. You mean that character that in your game, the one who's dressed like a gnome? That's cool. That's super cool. Mike says, as far as religion, I have goblins worshiping the same gods as the other peoples. I only use 3 main gods, but they do it in a more harsh manner. Totally makes sense. And that also makes sense because different cultures might interpret the teachings of the gods differently. And then this one is going to throw a wrench in the works. Gods and goddesses may speak and behave differently toward different cultures because they may see them as different types of tools in their mortal tool set. The gods in my world would totally be doing this because they're not, they're not some crazy enlightened beings. They have a lot of knowledge, but really they want to maintain their power and they want to maintain what they're doing. They definitely try to use mortals as pawns in their games. Mike says, or no, I'm sorry, Heavenly Buddha says, in the world, the Yanti Shara Mas intends to rule, the shaman, not Robin Hood. Chakra Mas. Oh, nice. Okay. Very nice. I like it. No, that's super cool lore. And I think it's super cool that your character or your player is playing a goblin. I'm assuming in your world, goblins have roughly the same reputation as traditional goblins and traditional D&D. Like they're looked on like, uh-oh, better kill those goblins. They're evil. They're up to no good. They're just a bunch of carnage-loving little fiends, not literal fiends, but metaphorically. Metaphorically, they're fiends. All right, now I want to read you one more little thing here, and I want to keep going back to this idea of resonance, emotional resonance, and exploring deeper meanings in our games. Mike says exactly. Each god has multiple aspects. One god who covers life and death, so 2 facets of worship. Yes, I love that, and I love that. I love it when gods like that. They like show their different faces to the different aspects. In fact, I had one little side arc in a side world going in one campaign I was running where they actually worshipped what was called the 9-faced god. And they had one face for each direction of the alignment. And then it would speak differently to people of different alignments. But the truth is, it was one godlike being and it was like one truth, one creation, but they knew that there had to be balance between all of the different alignments, and that if there wasn't a balance, the world would fall into imbalance, and then balance was needed for the world to continue and to, basically be what it was designed to be, which what is the world designed to be is a deep question. I don't think the players ever got that far. It is perhaps a question that is going to be answered differently by all of the 9 alignments. But anyway, individual gods even and goddesses may have this effect. They may treat worshipers differently, based on what their alignment is and what they would be willing to do for the god or the goddess, right? Which I think is very interesting. Now, I'm going to read you one more quote from my book, The Advanced Art of TTRPG Game Mastery, 24 Years of Gaming Wisdom packed into 50 pages. You can grab it in my description if you'd like to check it out more. But, if you want to run emotionally resonant games that your players will love to come back to, that's my treatise on the matter. But I want to read a little bit of this. Designing for resonance, not just plot, okay? We can get a lot of emotional resonance out of creatures like goblins. I'm going to describe this for you. In every campaign that stays with us, there's a moment we remember, or many moments, not because of the loot or the clever puzzles, but because it evoked emotion. Okay. Maybe it hurt. Maybe it healed. Maybe it struck some chord we didn't know was waiting to be played within us. These are the moments that live in memory, and they are not accidents, at least not usually. In the very best of cases, they are either designed or they are extrapolated and created from spontaneous player and NPC choices that lead to tremendously emotional opportunities for connection. And then I go on to say emotion is not extra, it is essential. And I'm going to read this for you. I'm going to describe how this fits into this. You can run a technically sound game and be relatively successful as a game master. Smooth mechanics, rich lore, even impressive tactical battles, these are all important. And they will likely lend to a greater success in engaging players and keeping them engaged, right? But without hard-hitting emotional arcs, these elements will always feel lesser, especially when compared to game experiences that do contain them. So hard-hitting emotional arcs, what does that mean? Technically sound games may entertain, they may satisfy in the moment, but they will not haunt the mind and memory when the dice have stopped rolling. They will not become the stuff of legend at your table for months and years in the future. Some players thrive on tactical precision, minis, modifiers, the hex grids, the sweet geometry of battle. Others, however, come alive in character, weaving emotion through voice, posture, and narrative presence. Both modes are valid, both have beauty, but beneath them flows a deeper current, through line that can elevate either play style into something unforgettable, and the emotional journey of the characters and the players who live those emotions and memories through them. Okay. So here's what I mean by this. When you face a goblin, okay, yes, you can say, okay, let's check the stat block. Oh, they have a short bow, they have a scimitar. Oh, their armor class is, 15. These are mechanical things, okay? But what is that goblin? But if we take just a minute, we think, what does this goblin want? What are they feeling in this moment? How is what they're feeling going to change their plan? Does this goblin struggle with courage, or are they just a mindless berserker, right? When this goblin sees his friends cut down in the battle and he's the last one, his back against the wall, and the player characters are coming at him, what is he going to do? How is he actually feeling? Is he going to break into tears and fall on his knees and like cry out and say, please, please, this was my first battle. I'm just a little adolescent goblin. I don't even know what I'm doing. The sword is too big for me. We never know what every person's going through. This is a life thing, but this is also true even in make-believe. We never know what every character is going through. So even if you're running a tactical battle, it's important to keep in mind as a GM, at least in the back of our mind, every one of these combatants have feelings. But maybe there's one that's going to shine through. Maybe there's one that's going to cut through and petition the players for help, or maybe one's going to try to surrender. Maybe one of them is going to try to look like they want pity, but then it's an underhanded manipulative tactic, and they're going to try to stab them when they're showing them mercy. Well, we don't know what's going on in the mind of every goblin, but exploring this as a GM and thinking, okay, what is psychologically going on with these creatures? What is emotionally going on with these creatures when you run them, either in battles or when the group encounters them and they're talking to them? And this is partly how you design for emotional resonance, because running a tactical battle is great. It engages intellect, strategy, love for the game and the mechanics aspect of it. Characters getting to use their spells and getting to use their weapons is awesome. But how are you going to grab the emotions to create that emotional resonance, get them to care more about what's going on? It can also go a different way. You may not be trying to elicit pity. You may be trying to elicit rage or anger or a true, like, justified desire for revenge. You may want to make these goblins even more revolting, more morally revolting than anyone thought they would be. And that's going to inspire emotions in your characters too. Maybe they're going to want to cut down all of the goblins, not take any for prisoners, right? When they find out what they've done or how they actually are, right? This is another thing. So designing for resonance, not just plot, I think is really important. Also designing for emotion, not just mechanics. This is important. I believe this is very important as a GM. Heavenly Buddha says, I think so, but in Green Garden, the place the goblin shaman came from, I was imagining something akin to the elven slums from Dragon Age, but goblins there, since it's a city ruled by elves but populated. Oh, so elves are like integrated, or I'm sorry, goblins are integrated into society in your game world. I think this is cool. To a point in my game world, that is also the truth, but it's kind of rare. Heavenly Buddha said, mostly by goblins, orcs, and half-orcs. Stuart says, loving the ideas in chat today. Almost as good as listening to GMP. Well, I appreciate that. Probably better than listening to GMP, honestly. We are facilitating conversation here. This isn't just to hear me yap, but I do a lot of yapping. Heavenly Buddha says, while Redwall is ruled by a long-running human kingdom, but like all other kingdoms on the continent, is subservient to the emperor of Terran Civi. I don't know if this is homebrew or I don't know what that means, but Heavenly Buddha says, What you just said reminds me of the Goblin warg writer my party captured, Gobnelius III, Rip, who after he learned Robin Hood was a goblin, gave him info on Chakra Mas and his lieutenants only. Interesting. Ah, that's cool. Okay, very cool. Oh, Goblin warg writer captured Gobnelius III. That's actually cool. I like that. And we say Rip, I assume he is no longer with us. Rest in peace, Gobnelius. You will be maybe missed, or maybe everyone's glad you're gone, depending on what kind of character it was. Sometimes there are characters that the players disdain so much that they're like, I'm glad they're gone. I would eliminate them again if given the chance. Anyway, all right, everyone, do me a favor. Hit that thumbs up button. Hit that subscribe button if you're new here. And that's going to be it for this one. I really appreciate everyone's awesome conversation today. I think we got goblins really talked about. I love it. Make sure to come back for the next one. I try to go live every weekday at 1 p.m. CST, so mark it on your calendars. If you would like to join in future live streams, roll some D100s for me at your next game. Empowering game masters is the goal here, and I will see all of you awesome people on the next one.